So today we've got quite a special video for you because I have my friend and dear colleague of sorts of Robin here to join me today for this video on imposter syndrome. But before we get into the video, I would just like to have Robin introduce himself and tell you a little bit more about what he's up to and what he does as compared to me just kind of waffling on about him as I surely could. So Robin, please take the floor.
Take the floor? Alright, so I make videos primarily. I'm very interested in a question of like, why do human beings read? You know, how do we bring reading into our lives a little better? How do we think about information critically? Because I think right now we're at a culture turning point where information is disseminating in such a special way that we need a sort of coping strategy to organize information. Also, when applied to education, my core concern is like, how do we frame education in a way that's like, bring back that in order to bring back that spirit of discovery instead of just memorizing a bunch of facts at school, instead of just turning people into mere instead of turning education into mere vocational training. How do we revive that idea of the liberal arts? So that's what I'm really passionate about. So currently I'm making a combination of two types of videos. I like to teach people how to read. That's one of my specialties. And I like to make extended video essays applying sort of like what I've learned to life. So in a sense, our work kind of connect very nicely together. So thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I know we had a previous conversation on language learning.
That's it.
A little while ago. And so I'm really happy to be able to get you here and get you on my channel for this time.
Your channel at my place.
Hey now, that is one special thing. So if any of you are interested in that, I'm going to have the link down in the description for you to check out. He's done a lot of really interesting things that I've actually come to love over the years as well. So I'm sure you'll find a great amount of value and benefit in that as well. But for today, now let's try and get into this video. You were talking about how the education system and learning and going through these really kind of important phases of development. And I know for me, I feel like you probably have a similar kind of perspective on things in this regard, is when we come to get higher and further in our education and through our own personal development, be it in a more academic sense or in a more personal development context, such as the self-improvement vibe that this channel is kind of based around, it can be very easy to misplace our own self-image in a way that can be negative, in a way that we can think that all of the success that we're gaining and all of the stuff that we're doing, that we might not deserve any of it. Have you ever had this kind of feeling before?
You mean imposter syndrome?
I do mean imposter syndrome, in
imposter
fact.
syndrome. Look, I never expected my work to get anywhere in the first place because it's just kind of like, the reason why I started my channel is just kind of like, I have a lot of thoughts about the education system. I was terribly unhappy when I was in high school. So I thought maybe I could dedicate maybe 20 minutes a day just recording how the way that I thought about the education system, or the way that I thought about how learning should be, because I was quite inspired by a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers, the European Enlightenment thinkers. In their way of treating education is such a different, like, it's a brand new way of viewing education, which I've never ever considered ever before. So because kids, they were trained to like hate school, right? They were trained to hate concepts, hate teachers, hate theories. But then I read these Enlightenment thinkers, I'm like, wow, there's a way to discover knowledge that's supposed to be exciting. Pursuing knowledge is supposed to be exciting. So then I started recording a lot of my thoughts in sort of like a package. So it's just kind of me turning on the camera and just going. And I sort of like articulating everything in a reasonable way. And I'm like, I can't be the only person who's thinking about this. And I started uploading them to YouTube without expecting anything from them. I'm just kind of like, I just sort of enjoy the process of doing this. It's kind of like a monkey is just doing his own thing. Like a circus monkey just on the street doing his own thing. And all of a sudden there's a crowd around this monkey. And the monkey's like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I don't know how to handle this crowd, right? So that's what happened to me. It was like, I think my channel really started to take off during the March of 2020. So that's when I got that huge spike that pushed me across 100,000 subscribers. So that was the point that I kind of realized, who even are you? I was 19 at the time, trying to like make sense of reality. I wasn't as well read as I wanted to be. I didn't read many like I couldn't really get my head into that space of like really digesting everything that I've read. And over the years, that have definitely improved over time. That's why I'm so passionate about sharing deeper insights in my video essays instead of just reading tips. But at the time, my psychology was not in a state that was like mature enough to handle a lot of the projects that I wanted to take on. So I felt like I had a need to play a character, where I had this need to be like someone that I'm not. And that incongruency sort of like killed me a little bit. But over the years, I had a lot of time to like think about and reflect on stuff, and then sort of like, just kind of reorientate myself back to this old idea of just sharing what I've read, or some authentic perspectives that I've had, and making them into digestible chunks and giving them to people, and I encourage people to think a little more, because this is my personal journey. And then once I made that connection, it's just kind of like, as long as you're in integrity with yourself, as long as you don't feel like you're performing on a stage, because YouTube is a performance, right? And that's why I've been dialing back on a lot of the performative aspects on YouTube. That's why I'm very comfortable just making a video that's one entire take of 20 minutes, because that's just me catching up with my thoughts on the spot. And I feel like that's a rather honest communication with the audience, and that's how I've sort of overcome. That's sort of like my method of overcoming this imposter syndrome, because I'm kind of sick of the performative aspect of like seducing the audience using special effects, music, and like I'm the loudest guy in the room. But I rather want to provide something that's real, in integrity with myself.
Yeah. I think, speaking to one of the last points you made just there about how easy, I think, especially in the context of, creating videos or creating content more broadly, it can be very easy to caricature ourselves
completely
in that kind of way of thinking we need to be a certain way or do a certain thing just to meet the expectations of the audience that we might have. And that can have a pretty detrimental effect to how we view ourselves, because then we're not necessarily expressing the person that we are, or the kind of person that we're aiming to be, and we're more so playing into this almost self-made stereotype of ourselves in a very strange way. And not only in the context of our kind of interests of making videos and kind of producing this kind of media content, but I think people can tend to, and I've definitely experienced this, of just doing that on everyday kind of things, be it at school or with some kind of sport that I'm doing, not feeling like we deserve the kinds of accolades or achievements that we receive as a result of our hard work. And in that way, it can be difficult to keep pursuing something if we don't feel like we deserve it.
Completely. And also you have to realize, you have to make a very firm sort of like distinction, like, what are you putting effort into? For example, this is one of the firm critiques that I have against people who want to be influencers at such a young age, because I was like fairly young when I started making YouTube videos, and that sort of that process, I'm not like preaching as an old man here. I've been on YouTube for a little while, but it's just kind of like I've been here for long enough that I knew what it was like to get seduced by pursuing this type of work just for an image, just for your own ego, and just for your own sort of like self-satisfaction. But that's almost a breeding ground for imposter syndrome, because if all you care about is getting your name out there or getting your image out there, if all you care about is making yourself the most glamorous looking influencer or whatever that is, then you're carefully curating a picture that's not even real, right? You're carefully cultivating a picture that one day it will get destroyed, one day it will evaporate, and then people are going to look at you in real life. It's just like, he's not the person that we thought he was. And then a car parks in front of your house. It's like people arrest you away, right? Fear of every imposter. And then, but once here's my theory on this thing. The thing that I express on YouTube is perhaps the tip of the iceberg. Is like 5% of what's actually happened within me. But that 5% has to be an expression of the cause, of the source of my inspiration, like the source of my love, for example, for history, for philosophy, for literature. Like, I cannot make those 5% visible and condensed information, or like how I'm talking on the camera. And that's the 5% of this iceberg, which is my deep love for these disciplines, which is those hours in the library no one gets to see. But if I rest in the security is that I've done my hours in the library, I'm up and coming grad student, I'm going to pursue the humanities for the rest of my life, and I'm comfortable portraying those 5% as my authentic aspect. And then if people want to copy that 5% of my presentation, people can be like, we love your aesthetic, or we love your this, we love how you hold yourself. But what they have to realize is that that is a product of just so many years of wrestling against self-discovery and then personal development. And then you have this little nuke of like, here's my result, here's a little result, but what you don't see what's down here, right? So a lot of people on social media, they focus on this. They're like, how do I develop myself so I can get that little tip without putting in any of consideration into deeper things? Like, for example, how do you behave on a daily basis? How do you read? How do you portray yourself? How do you, think a little deeper? How do you be just a decent person from day-to-day life? If we neglect that, if we neglect the iceberg, then you can have all sorts of glamorous presentation of your lifestyle, but you're still going to be a mess. So for me, it's rather important for me to take care of the rest of my life, so I can portray myself as a role model using that 5%. So I can be very firm in my understanding of subjects, because I've read a lot on the subject. For example, every fact is researched, everything I'm presenting has ground, and I'm trying to bring the most value to my audience.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I think also I feel like, and again, you probably have a similar kind of idea on this, that as you were talking about with presenting only that 5%, you're only realistically able to present such a small sliver, not only of your personality or of our personalities, but the people at home don't get to see the, countless hours of, outtakes or mistakes that we've made in the years leading up to this very moment of being able to communicate in the ways that we might be able to, or for the student that only the other students in the class might only be able to see that they got a 96 on their final grade for a particular unit, but they weren't there for the, again, countless hours of studying alone, as you said, in the library by yourself. It's so easy to take this very complex and very intricate, process of what it takes to reach a certain outcome, but then people might only be able to see just the surface layer and take that as reality. I think another problem comes in when sometimes people in, let's say, high school, stereotypically, might do well on particular exams or in particular classes, and they might feel as though they don't deserve it. And I think they can be hit with this reality when, for example, they get to university or graduate school, or once they get out of school and they get into the real world, and they might realize that things aren't quite the same way that they previously had conceptualized it as. And that can be very shocking. That can be very, I don't want to say triggering, but it can be very jarring.
It destroys your whole frame of view in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The reference points that you've built up to that point are shattered as a result of that changing reality, let's say. And if we're to consider this idea of imposter syndrome, of thinking that we're not actually good enough for what we're doing, and we keep succeeding, then it can be difficult to not see the reality of the situation, that we are vulnerable. We are not, this immovable object of perfection that might be outwardly perceived to be. I think also in this kind of way there is a inclination for us to, as we said before, share only the best parts. Whereas I feel if we simply are sharing the best of if we are sharing ourselves to the best capacity that is genuine, then we can't really expect too much else. We kind of just have to accept the reality. The problem comes in when we start comparing highlight reels to bloopers, right? The classic saying of that comparison being not very well matching. No. The fit between those two situations does not vibe very well in terms of being equivalent or proportional.
Completely. Yeah. And then Wittgenstein had like a pictorial theory of language. And I made a video essay on this. So why is reality so boring? It's because language has a way of infiltrating into your brain that like it creates a like sort of like an impression on your brain, right? Even then nowadays with social media, it's like blatantly obvious that you're looking at the best parts of another person's life. And then the same with like feeling like an imposter, because so much of your life could be such a construction that you don't even realize that you're making this construction in the first place. And if you don't allow your authentic way of living as a sort of like, this is like Bertrand Russell had a point against self-absorption, and this is exactly what I think is the case. So Russell wrote this little book called A Conquest of Happiness. In that chapter, he talked about one of the key causes of unhappiness is sort of like this self-absorption. And I feel like this is a key issue that sort of like needs to be thought about as we dive deeper and deeper into social media, because nowadays people are not really focused on value providing as much as, let's gain fame. It's fame over providing value.
Yeah.
Whereas real value comes from a person's sort of like a real like sort of influential personality. For example, whoever you like to watch on YouTube, or some really valuable piece of content, or a really good author that you've read, what you would have realized is that they stayed in touch with their integrity all the time. And then their authentic sort of personality is disseminated from the source of that sort of integrity, deep integrity. And in whatever manifestation that is, people can make up their minds about the person, the creator. People can criticize the creator. People can praise the creator. But the creator's unmoved, because he or she or they are grounded in principles. And I feel like in this day and age, especially if we want to create productive content, if we want to be like truly meaningful creators, creating something that means something for the modern world, instead of just like dance videos on TikTok, I'm a rather like an old school master when it comes down to this. I'm that person at the door with a ruler. It's just like kind of like, do your homework, But in my opinion, just my humble opinion, if we want to create meaningful content, we have to first of all define what our principles are. What is that integrity that we're trying to achieve? Otherwise, if you don't have integrity, anything could throw you off the track. A negative comment here, another YouTuber taking a jab at you there. But once you figured out what your goal is with your work, it takes a lot of self-discovery, journaling, and then it takes a lot of years just kind of like asking yourself questions. But at the end of the day, once you find out what that is, all of your imposter syndrome stuff will get solved, because you realize that your work is a true extension of yourself. It's your art. My video essays, they came from my speculations, and I'm very proud of these analyses. I'm very proud of all the hours of research that I've dedicated into these video essays and essays. That's something to take pride in. And then by taking pride, I don't mean gloating yourself up. It's like, I'm amazing. But this is simply a recognition of like, this is the best I can do now, And it's a solid piece of work coming from a deep sort of like principle-driven work ethic. And then once I put that in, that sort of like the earlier imposter problem sort of disappeared, because I know I'm doing like real work, making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, I think social media is one of those things where it can magnify things, and you keep the receipts eventually. Where you can only keep up an act for so long.
That's it.
Until it eventually will come out regardless. But I think the problem with imposter syndrome in this context is people may be trying their best to put their best foot forward, but the problem that I've found, again, in my life, is you put things out with the best intentions, but you hang on so desperately to the social validation that will come back towards you. And subconsciously, that, I think, may change the kind of content you decide to put out. If you are only deciding to put out content that is based on an idea of what you think will just be liked or, give you some kind of acclaim, it can adjust the person that you're, portraying yourself to be in that context. And in that way, as you were talking about, it's so important to be as genuine and as honest as you can be in whatever it is that we're doing, because otherwise the people aren't really watching you or me. They're watching some other character that we've kind of come up with in our spare time, just because we think that's what's gonna eventually give us the love that we're obviously like searching for.
Yeah, and then that's why I think self-discovery is a paradox in the age of social media, because you're trying to discover yourself. You're trying to put your best foot forward. You're trying to be authentic on YouTube. But like any forms of art, you can't be authentic right off the bat. So what do? You imitate other creators. You're like, I like this stuff.
Yeah.
Let me try this out. But then what really helped me personally in terms of like finding my authentic sort of like presentation style is because I'm a naturally bookworm. I just read all the time. YouTube is kind of like stretching it for me. It's kind of like, it's one of those rare opportunities that I get to put everything that I was thinking about on a page or over camera. But what helped me a lot is to spend a lot of time alone and realize that being on YouTube, that's like 1% content creation, 99% thinking about your content. So for me, it's 99% of just me reading, doing research, and then getting a video essay out, or like being behind a computer, just kind of like drafting an essay, redrafting an essay, getting sources correct. And it's 1% of me just standing in front of a camera, actually talking about it. Right? So as I'm talking about it, that 1%, there's all this stuff behind it already, the self-discovery work, that whatever comes out just has to be authentic because I've spent all this time alone. Whereas if I just chose to go on my phone all the time, if I don't do the research, or if I don't try to keep my audience in mind when I'm creating this kind of content, because it is a marketing strategy after all. You're trying to create content for an audience. It's not just for you. Sure. So you need to combine your personality and keep the audience in mind. What's the value that I can offer?
For the relevance.
For the relevance.
It's got to be relevant to them.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you put those two together and you do the work of like figuring out what that is, when you push that out, well, that's the closest thing that's ever going to be. Closest thing that could ever be to your authentic kind of like ways of communicating.
And that process of content creation is such an opportunity, not only for potential negative things, but potential positive things as well. Finding your voice, having an ability to communicate your thoughts in that kind of way is such a beautiful and majestic thing, majestic skill to acquire over time.
It changed my life. Yeah.
Because you're only going to be able to get to that point through messing up and making all these mistakes and being inauthentic, and then realizing that's not the way to go. And then, as you said, through that process of imitation and then your own personal self-creation is a way to almost actualize yourself in a way that you wouldn't have been able to
completely
otherwise. Or you could have, but it would have just been maybe a longer, different process than that instant feedback of posting something online and having people commenting on it.
Yep.
Not that, as you said, we should let that sway us too much, being negative or positive, because I think that does come down to the root of what imposter syndrome is kind of about, where we're taking too much heed in what other people think of us. And we might get high on what people say that it's good, but we also will get very, very low potentially in the same breath if the next minute we get another comment that is the exact antithesis.
This sucks, man.
This guy, who does he think he is?
Yeah.
And we've talked about this, at other times where, who are we as young individuals, talking about these kinds of topics that, are really, really important, that are really, potentially require more years of experience to, encounter. But the thing that I always say is, it's not so much about putting things out that we know for 100% fact are absolutely true and perfect and golden, but as long as they are the best that we can put out now, that is the thing that is the most authentic to our current stage in that process of self-development. That can be that receipt
completely
book, right?
It has to come from a process. It has to come from a place of principle, instead of just based on validation, because that criteria is always, it's a moving target. Whereas principle is something you can ground yourself in over and over and over again. For example, the principle of excellence, perfection, or like the principle of like, I want every video I make to be insightful for another person, right? And that is a criteria that you yourself can control. Once you fulfill that, that's the end of your job. Move on to the next video. Move on to the next video. So you're grounded as a creator. I feel like that's really the best. That's really the best from which to create content.
Do you think that kind of stems from maybe a little bit more of an idea of input versus output?
Completely.
So focusing on what we are putting in to our work or our school or our life and our relationships, as compared to just the core, results, outcomes, things that happen, because that's not so much based on what people think of us. It's just simply based on, have we done what we've wanted to do in this context, and did we do it in the way in which it felt most right to us? That's all we can hope for at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Do you think that is kind of realistically one of the most important parts of this, or do you think there's other things as well?
I think it's Joseph Campbell. He had a sort of mythological structure of hero myths, and then one of the concepts was follow your bliss. And he said, in order to discover your true purpose in life, the hero has to discover his bliss first, or before the quest, there has to be this process of it might have been someone else, but there's this concept of following your bliss. That you need to pursue whatever it is that really interests you. But so often we get distracted by inauthentic values. Maybe it's because of marketing, maybe it's because of another influencer. And these inauthenticities, that's bringing people into a stage of being really self-involved. Because inauthenticity can only happen within a sphere of trying to become this sort of ego, building up an ego around it, which is by necessity not really what you want. But you're wanting it for some ulterior motive. Maybe you want fame, maybe you want that engagement on Instagram. So that's taking you away from really following your bliss. So in my opinion, it's just whatever you create, you should absolutely enjoy the process of creation and let the chips fall where they may, And then I could not make, for example, 300 videos before I started to find any success on YouTube. I could not do that if I didn't love the process of it. And if I just wanted to make these videos just to be someone, I would have stopped at the point of 20 videos. So follow your bliss and make sure that bliss is grounded in principles, which I think is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that idea of following your bliss, of doing what it is you're truly interested in, even though, it might not be exactly what will get you the most acclaim in the external world, as long as it's something that you can feel as though it's nourishing and regenerating you from the inside out, then that's all you can really hope for. That's all you can really ask for. Well, Robin, that will probably be it for today, because I know both of our cameras have recording limits that we must not...
It's terrible.
We must not break.
We can go on and on and on and on for hours. 4 hours.
Oh, what? First couple times we met, how long did we talk?
The first time was 4 hours.
And what was the second time?
12 hours.
12 hours. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, that was 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. we spoke.
There's not a camera on planet Earth that could record 12 hours.
Oh, we need some miracle to being able to capture that. But thankfully we were able to capture this little small snippet, this slice of the conversations we have. So once again, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate having you here.
Me. Yeah.
And I look forward to hopefully having you in future videos. Unfortunately, I'm going to be heading to South Korea soon, so we're going to have to book something in once I'm back in, you know, a little over a year's time. But not to worry. I'm sure we'll have quite the time when I get back, so we can hold out hope for that moment.
Let's do it. All right.
But thank you all for watching. I know that you would have gotten a lot of value from kind of this talking with such a man. So yeah, once again, as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here, and do more than you think you can.
Fuck
Hell yeah.